started. Everybody grab a seat.
Now we're worried about being agile.
So super privileged tonight to have our speaker, Scott Gibson, who's the only director of quality assurance at Amazon that they've ever had.
I just heard that there was been others.
When I heard that tonight, I was super surprised. And so I'll let you describe your credentials. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining this group. This is the last one of 2014, which makes it our 14th year of hosting this quality assurance session. And hopefully you guys will continue to be part of the community next year as we move forward with everything. But anyway, Scott Gibson.
So this is a presentation I've done, I think, 20 times at Amazon. I've been there for 2 years, and every time I give it is shocking to the people I give it to. And they say, this fundamentally changes the way I do things. I've done this presentation at Microsoft, my old boss is sitting back here. It was not shocking, and I'm not sure why the difference. People thought, yeah, that's a good way to do it, and it makes sense, and we'll just do it. But I think the team I have now is pure software. Microsoft was mostly hardware, and I think that this way of thinking, for some reason, is new to software people, even though it comes from software. So, and I did find out I'm not the only director of quality at Amazon ever. I'm the only one now. Apparently, there's been others in the past.
What did you do with the others?
I don't know what happened to them. I'd like to find out. So if you have any questions during this, please bring it up. I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly. Just looking at the group here, I'm thinking you guys are going to say, yeah, that's expected. So bear with me a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we test, why do we exist, right? Everyone here is involved in QA of some sort. I think everyone here is software, mostly. And because of those fundamentals, should I stand somewhere else?
Yeah.
Where should I stand? Over here?
Is it possible to move this podium a little bit to the this direction? No.
Can everybody sit on that side?
It's perfect. That's awesome.
Then I'll stand right here. But anyway, let's just get into it. So this is my experience with QA, with a new person, or actually in my experience in testing throughout my career. And I'm probably the oldest person here. Maybe close. So you start off and you're all excited, I found a bug, and you tell somebody on the team, like a program manager, and they say, oh, that's not good. And then you say, I found another bug, and this is bad for the project. And then we found another bug. You won't even take credit for it, and then can this get worse, right? And then, okay, there's another bug. It's like you don't even give anyone credit for it, there's just another bug somehow. And the business's response is, this is bad, right? You're finding all of these problems. So what does the really smart test person do? They change their approach to, we're passing 93% of our tests. And what is the business response? That's fantastic. That's really great, right?
Awesome.
So even though I don't think any company does this exactly like this, it's actually themes of this you'll see, you guys have probably all seen in your careers. A similar situation is once that product's out in the field, a bug is found, and they go straight to the test guy and say, why did you miss this, right? You should have found this issue. And it's a legitimate thing to say, and so the test guy says, I need to do better, right? So then it happens again, and then it says, sorry, this is the worst thing. So what does the really smart test guy say? We passed all the tests on the plan, and it was reviewed by the team. So we throw it back on them, and the weird thing is the business accepts that, and they say, oh yeah, this must be a dev issue, or this is somebody else's problem, because it was reviewed by the team. I don't think test people like that so much, but I have that little smile on the side because I think we kind of secretly like getting out of having the VP or whoever coming down on us. But to me, this is a shift that's happened in my career. I think it goes in cycles. It happens in single people's short time at a company. It's weird how it shifts. And so, to me, I think, okay, how should we test? What should we do, right? So if we can shift and be all excited about finding bugs, and then no, we shift our thinking to being, no, we'll talk about passing tests, what do we really want to do? So I wanted to answer the question is the testing's mission to demonstrate that the product works as desired, or to find correct product defects to improve product quality? Think about it, don't answer yet.
Tyranny of or.
What's that?
The tyranny of or.
Yeah, right. Well, exactly. Think about it. Another way of putting this is the best result passing a test, or is the best result failing a test. And in my experience, these are people that most people tend to want to pass their tests, right? They put together a great test plan, and they want to get those passed, and that says the product is good. Some people are in the middle saying, yeah, but I still want to find a lot of bugs, but I still want to pass my tests. And then there's a few rogue people out here that say, all I want to do is fail. I just want to fail everything I possibly can. I never want to see anything passing.
Why not both malicious testers?
Oh, yeah.
Why not both on a timeline? Why not both equal? And I'm serious here. That's going to change based on a lighthouse customer being shipped a product versus catching it before they get it. And so both should be true in my opinion, depending on the time.
Hold on to that.
Okay.
Well, you don't have to hold on to it. You can keep saying that throughout the presentation if you like. But think about that. Everybody think of where you sit. Where do you really sit? I mean, I think in our minds we have a certain self-view where we sit somewhere in there, but how do we really operate? I would propose that most of you operate over here. Most of your teams operate here. We ask our teams to operate here.
And another way to think about it, some people might see the glass half full, and some people see it half empty.
Mm-hmm.
Or you just consider the glass as twice as big as it needs to be.
Gigantic empty glass.
Well, it's twice as big as it needs to be, where a test is basically just stating reality. And
Okay. Think about that too.
All right.
Everybody just know where you're at. It will be good for you to remember what you're thinking, where you sit in this. So how should we test? How do we really answer that question? It should be very simple. So we go back to fundamentals, right? So Eusebius. It's interesting. It's hard to figure out who actually came up with the scientific method. This is the best guy I could come up with. And it was really odd news. It was actually a really interesting study if anybody wants to look into it on their own. But did everybody learn a scientific method in school?
Yeah.
Anybody under 30, did they learn it? You did? It's weird. Most of the young people, my team is very young, and a lot of them are 30 and under. Most of them did not learn the scientific method. But
They forgot it in high school.
they may have forgot, right?
Yeah.
But we all know in this, you make an observation, you form a hypothesis about that, you make predictions on what will happen, you test that hypothesis, you observe the results of that, you reform your hypothesis, you test it again, you keep going around and around, reformulating your hypothesis, testing it. That's what we do as test people, right? We test our hypothesis. So then you can never prove something true. Everybody knows this guy, right? Or your favorite philosopher, scientist of all time, Sir Carl Raymond Popper. If you don't know about him, I encourage you to look him up. Really odd guy, but he has some really cool ideas. His whole thing was empirical falsification. You can never prove something true. You can only prove it false, right? So if you think about that, there's a classic experiment that I always say it this way too, that I hate because it's actually, I think it's easy to prove that it's not a very good experiment, but trying to prove that all swans are white. And so if you want to go and prove that true, you have to go find literally every swan and show that it's white. If you're trying to prove it false, you need to formulate experiments that will find the one that's not white.
What's the problem with security testing?
The what?
That's the problem with security testing. Are you secure?
Yeah.
Yes,
So anyway, so Popper's proposition is you can only prove things false. Do not try to prove them true. You can only prove them false. And so then the scientific method, then every hypothesis has to be refutable. If it's not refutable, it doesn't work, right? And so every test has to refute, right? Because if you design tests to try to prove something true, it's a useless effort, right? It will take an infinite number of tests, literally, to do that. So in testing, our hypothesis is something like prove that we meet beta quality, prove that we meet shipping quality, whatever that is for your product, right? And then at every stage, during development, we try to prove that not true. So when I took over on the tablet projects at Amazon, we were just entering beta, and we just had piles of just horrible bugs. Obviously, we weren't at beta quality, so I asked my team, are we at beta quality? Each different individual functional group, no. Do you have evidence to support it? Yep, we got all these bugs, we got these blockers. And I said, so what do we do? We've already proven that we don't need beta quality, we can all just go home, right? And truly, I believe you can, although you all get probably fired, but you've proven that you're not at beta quality, right? So our goal then was just to pile them all the more so we can fix those blocker bugs and actually get there, right? We don't want to drag out the process. But that's the idea. So, this is pretty simple, right? And if you don't believe me on empirical falsification, Einstein agrees with me, or I agree with him. No amount of experimentation can ever prove me right. A single experiment can prove me wrong. So if this is true, how do we think back on this? Best result is passing a test, or the best result is failing a test? And say the hypothesis then is the product or feature is acceptable for whatever that means at the stage that you're at.
Question about your metaphor for the scientific model for understanding reality compared to product quality. You're talking about like disproving a scientific theory, and then with product quality, what is the model, for example, a feature or a product feature?
It could be a product feature, it could be the user experience for what you're responsible for. For my team, we're broken up into functional areas, and so each of them have, so for the easiest things are things that users see, but so for framework, we have to be able to, you have to be able to call all the APIs, you have to be able to do all these things, you have to not crash, you have to, it has to do that. So our goal is not to prove that it does do all those things. Our goal is to prove that it doesn't, right? Which is infinitely easier, and in fact possible. Is that what you're saying? Or I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
It does, well, it does. I'm not sure I like the metaphor, but yeah, that's it.
Okay, well.
We can discuss that.
Okay, well maybe you'll like it better when we finish this slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the one side is trying to prove a hypothesis true, impossible, right? Infinite number of tests are required, right? The other side is trying to prove a hypothesis false. One failing test is all that you need to do to prove it. What I'm going to say is it's a setup, right? That I think this is the wrong way to think about the problem. I think some of you are kind of getting at that. This is like, wait a minute, we're missing something here. But still, passing and failing tests is what we do. And so if all tests are designed to falsify, every single test that you design is intended to make the product fail. You don't design a test that's supposed to pass. You design a test that you think will cause the product to fail in a way that you are trying to make it fail. Then if a test fails, fantastic. You learn your most information, and you can fix something and make the product better. If you pass a falsifying test, it was intended to fail and it didn't. That tells you a little bit of something that maybe the hypothesis is true. It doesn't prove it. You can never prove it, but it starts to build up evidence to support that. If your tests are designed to pass, when they pass, you don't really learn anything, right? So you want to design all your tests to falsify. This is the thing that at Amazon people just think this is fundamentally earth-shattering for their jobs. It's like they really struggle with it.
But I mean, don't they just, even in the basic unit test cycle, first make the test fail, then actually implement the thing, and then see that it passes?
That's TDD.
Let's talk about
I know, but it's the same concept.
No, but that's an excellent question, and we're going to get to that.
Yeah, okay, I'll say it.
If you can't falsify the test.
Well,
What do you mean by design to falsify?
Oh.
Can you get into that?
Your test is intended to make the product fail in some way. So if you're trying to find, if you say you're testing for stability, so you don't do tests that are designed to pass. So a test that's designed to pass is usually a little bit simpler. Maybe it's the happy path, some people say. And it doesn't really stress. Like when you're thinking of how to make this thing fail, you think of those weird things, you think of those harder things, the tests that will really stress the system that will cause it to fail.
The test pass when you cause an overflow. The test pass when you cause a crash.
Well, it fails when you find a bug. So when I say fail, I mean you found a bug.
Right, but you said it's designed to falsify. So if you're
It's
designed
designed to find bugs, yeah.
So you have a
So it
test.
met its design goal if it finds a bug by failing the product.
Right.
By failing the product, that's why I said it passes if it causes a product to fail in some certain way.
Okay, I don't think of it that way, but yes.
Okay, that's right.
I wouldn't say those words, because I think it's.
Well, then maybe you should say it your way, and I'll get it better, I don't know.
No, but you're right.
Okay.
Your intent is to, the result you're looking for is a failure.
Right.
Right, and so we'll get into what that really means for what you do day to day. And so if the intent is to find a failure and you're running a test, to say the same test, you run it over and over again and it always passes, you're not really adding any information, you're not learning anything, and it's
not true. That's not true.
if the test is designed to fail and you run it over and over again, when it passes 10 times in a row and it passes the 11th time, what have you learned?
You've learned that it still does what the test is measuring, and that you have not failed in that area. So that's a regression test. You're describing a regression test.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about regressions in a second. And maybe I shouldn't talk about it yet, but I will talk about it a little bit. It's a really important point is if the test is intended to falsify, you do learn that little bit of thing. It passes, right? But let's wait on that.
Sure.
Because there's a few other points I want to put on that to help answer it. This is awesome. I wish my team would have been able to ask questions like this. So here's the purpose of testing from my team, right? My team is actually responsible for framework and platform on all devices at Amazon. So improve the product quality by identifying bugs and seeing them fixed or driving them to get fixed. You don't just throw them over the wall. We actually make sure they get fixed. You guys understand that. Secondarily, we quantify the quality risk to the customer of shipping in the product in its current state. That's a secondary benefit because we are going to ship and we have to know what's the risk of shipping.
Interesting. I would flip those.
Okay.
The number one is quantifying the risk.
To me, the number one thing is shipping a quality product.
I assume you're going to address this, but you
They do
can't.
go together.
But you will ship the
You can't improve a
Absolutely.
quality product by finding bugs. I mean, that's not sufficient, right? There can be an infinite number of bugs and you find
Absolutely.
100. Doesn't improve the product.
Right.
Okay.
It does improve it.
That's why it's
Okay,
sitting
so
fixed.
all of these questions we will touch on briefly. But I do only have a half hour.
Yeah.
We could talk about it later. Actually, this is the first class I give to my teams. I have a whole series of things, and this is the first one. It's just like this fun foundations, right? And the next one is test coverage, which is what you're talking about.
Okay.
What does this mean for test coverage? We have an infinitely large problem space, which we haven't talked about yet, but it truly is infinite. And I think you guys, anybody think it's not infinite? Or at least close enough to infinite, right? It's humongous, and sometimes it's countably infinite, sometimes it's not countably infinite, if that matters to you, but it's infinitely large. So by definition, our test coverage is always 0%, right? In the generic sense, right?
Yes.
Right? There's code coverage where you can get to 100%, but we all know that means something, but it doesn't mean that you're done. And so there's bugs across this. This is kind of what you're talking about. We don't know how many bugs there are. There's bugs across this infinitely large space, and our job is to find those bugs. And then these stars are supposed to be tests. And the stars find bugs. Some do, some don't. They're all intended to find bugs. They're designed to find things that we know are problems that products have. We test the interfaces and things like that, right? That we know have a probability of finding bugs. Some do, some don't. But still, our coverage is 0%. So how do we use test coverage? I think test coverage techniques are fantastic. But test coverage, again, is a falsifying thing. They use to measure where our coverage is lacking. Where are we doing poorly? If you've done code coverage, which most people have, which I use as an example a lot, although I don't think it's the best, it is one that we all understand. You can find code that you're just not executing. You can decide if you need to or not. Right? Sometimes you might say that's okay not to. But it tells you where you're weak. If you have 100% coverage on certain parts of your code, that doesn't mean your code is perfect if you don't find bugs with those tests. Test planning techniques are great coverage, right? You can break your problem up into pieces, and you can figure out that you have all the chunks covered, all the interfaces covered. One thing that we use which most people use for what we consider a test coverage technique, is bug escapes. Bugs that other teams other than my team find is a way to measure my coverage, right?
Okay.
Right? So most people don't think of that as coverage, but anything that tells us where our testing is weak is a great coverage tool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Customers also.
So I agree with all those, I don't understand bug density that you list on the slide as a coverage.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you,
Escapes, yes.
Yeah, escapes is easier, I think. Bug density is actually what I mean by that, is, if I remember why I put that on there so long ago, is if there's areas where you're not finding bugs, if there's functions that you're not finding bugs, you probably have weak coverage there.
Right.
Not necessarily. But I shouldn't say probably. You might, and you need to make a decision, is it worth your effort to test more there? If you have areas that you're finding tons of bugs, again, you might want to test that really hard also, because you are finding
Actually, I
lots
don't
of bugs.
think even the data supports that. They've done lots of analysis of software, and there are naturally low-density areas and naturally high-density. In fact, the easiest way to find more bugs is to focus on the areas that have been most buggy in the past.
Yep, I totally agree.
So
But what I'm
focusing
saying
on the
is-
low-density areas doesn't buy you better coverage.
But you're not saying the second thing I said, which is if you have areas that have high numbers of bugs, you may want to test there more, because when there's some, there's always more. But again, you may say, I found enough, and it's so critical, let's get those fixed before we even look at it again. Or let's go back and look at the design and fix the root cause of this, or whatever it is. It's a way to find where your testing is weak, right? It could be.
Okay, I'm not buying this one.
But no, exactly the reason you said this
You
is
could just
is the
agree,
reason,
Steve,
right?
yeah.
Exactly what you're saying is the reason that we would do that, right? Anything that can help you know where to test is a test coverage tool, because that's the intent of this. And the problem space is infinite, so you will never have perfect coverage, so you just always know that, and this helps guide you through that. Test planning. So people think I'm not an advocate for test plans. I absolutely am. This is the test plan definition, or something like this, that you'll find if you do a search on QASIG, right? Something like that. Complete list of testing is required to ensure the feature system is of high quality. So if you just run these tests and pass them, great, we can ship. When I started, I shouldn't talk about Amazon. At a certain company,
Sells books online?
this is what my team did. They had a fixed set of tests. They ran those tests until they passed. Some of them were really great tests that found a lot of bugs, and they continually found bugs. So they were well-designed tests, some of them. But it definitely was a misguided expectation that once you passed all those, we were ready to ship. It was a good product, good quality product. We didn't know that. It may have been, but certainly those tests didn't prove that. This testing approach, implications to test plans, is test plans are dynamic, they're never complete. We all know that. You have an infinitely large problem space, that alone tells you it can't ever be complete. But it can be complete enough for the risk that your company is willing to take, right? So you're always balancing that. So I like to create a test plan to cover broadly across the entire space, and then from the results decide where to go from there, right? You work your way around. So modify based on results. Nobody's going to say that. It's amazing. Okay, so test plan is a starting point and a dynamic roadmap to lead us to finding bugs, right? The purpose is to find bugs.
It's like a military strategy. You need the plans, and then as soon as you engage.
But I disagree with the whole mission of finding bugs, like your whole job is finding bugs, because actually.
Improve product quality by finding bugs.
It's measuring product quality, right?
Yeah.
And finding bugs is just part of that. But the big picture, measuring product quality, is it good enough to ship? And can we find the important issues before our customers do, or at least have a high probability of our customers not finding the breaking issue? That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but our goal truly is to improve the product quality, to what that means for the product we're shipping.
Well, to measure product
No,
quality.
his was improved.
Improve.
Yours is measured, his is.
Mine is improve.
Yeah, but you have to do both. Well,
If
potentially.
you can't measure it, it's hard to improve. But
Okay, my disagreement is that the point of what you're doing is to find bugs. Because I see that and it's wrong, and I'm not arguing about that, but that's not the point.
I do want to talk to you about that afterwards.
Okay.
You might have a good point.
Yeah.
So I thought one of the main purposes of a test plan, depending upon what type of test plan you're talking about, is to use it as a communication tool.
Set expectations with stakeholders.
Like a requirement.
To communicate what?
Set expectation with stakeholders, your team, whoever, so that everybody knows what is going on with the project, how are you intending to test, what, you know.
I just want to
And that's the
clarify.
idea of the roadmap, and it's like, it's for you and for anyone who you're working with to understand, right?
I just
Where
want to
you're going,
clarify,
where
you put
you're
a red cross on that. That means,
Oh.
what does that actually red cross means? Is that a wrong definition?
I think that's wrong. Yeah.
Wrong, okay, so that's what that means.
Yeah, and, oh yeah, sorry. It wasn't emphasizing it, it was saying no.
Okay, that.
And the bottom one is the correct one, sorry.
Okay, I just want to understand that difference.
Okay.
So what about if we think about that test isn't necessarily to find bugs, but to help prevent bugs by thinking about how it could go wrong ahead of time? Like, it's kind of almost like a strategy or something upstream. If we don't think of it as being a separate activity, but we're thinking
So that's
about
how, when we talk about the total quality process, right, you push back
Right.
earlier, so if you can fix it in the design before it's ever coded up,
right.
it's by far the best, right?
But I mean, once again, I think it kind of aligns with what you're saying, where if we're thinking where might this break, and we can actually build more robustness into it from the start
Yeah.
around those areas. And so whether it be a plan or a strategy, it kind of helps give us good insights.
That's an excellent point, and it's interesting. You have to have a much more mature organization and process in order to do that effectively.
Sure.
That's like
I agree with Art. I would say he's talking, well, I was going to add regression tests, as in, oh, this is working, cool, this is everything. And now we have to make sure it continues working while there's product churn and working towards release.
Yep.
And that's the plan for regression.
We'll talk about regression testing, I think, on the next slide.
Okay.
No. Sorry. Smoke tests. I think regression's in here somewhere. So smoke tests, usually it's basic functionalities there, right? So build verification tests, build acceptance tests, any tests. There's all kinds of names for it, but it's something that you run before anyone else tests it. Right? So it says this is testable, it's ready to go. So there's some minimum bar, all basic functionality work. So like on our tablets, we might on email app, we might send an email.
But that is a type of regression testing.
It absolutely is, yeah. So the hypothesis that we're testing here is they're showing that the build is not fundamentally broken. And so we design tests to show that it is fundamentally broken. And so these are kind of reports I get every day. Test cases, build number, and pass. Or fail, and then all of a sudden somebody finally fixes the bug and it's passing all the time. We do want the history here, we do want to know. We don't want to change our build verification or smoke tests constantly, but early in the project, these tests that are passing now might have been good tests, but now they're so simple that they're really not telling us much about basic functionality, right? So maybe the next slide says this, but I'll do it here anyway. We want these to change as the product matures, right? As we're developing, our smoke test at feature complete should be different than our smoke test right before our last testing pass, or whatever we call it. So the idea here is it shouldn't be static. We've got to think about what's going to find the bugs that show that this is fundamentally broken. What's going to accomplish this thing that we're trying to do is to show that it's not fundamentally broken.
And going back to when you're talking about your testing to falsify, how'd you put it again?
Falsify.
Okay, are you going to give examples of that? What some of your tests do?
We can afterwards.
Because you're talking about how the tests need to evolve, so I thought that.
Yep. Yeah, and one way, just a real simple example of the way the testing evolves, and the reason I use emails, this is one that we talked about a lot in my group, is we really did start with the testing. All it did was send an email. And then now it sends an email with an attachment, or and it has a large attachment, or it does something. We kind of add to it. Just makes it just a little bit harder. It's still fundamental, right? If that's broken, that's really bad, right? It still meets the requirement of fundamentally broken, but it's more appropriate to later in the product, right? It's a little bit more stressful. It's a little bit harder test. So I say smoke tests should not be static, but they should not be crazy dynamic either, right? Mm-hmm. They should shift as the product shifts, right? And in
By
quality.
static here, you mean change, the tests themselves change over time, not that
That's
the
what I-
tests
that's-
are
yes.
randomized.
That's right, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, not covering a different space each
That's
time
right.
they
Yeah.
run.
Right.
So it's a single test, they're all getting longer, like I have 10 tests, but they're all getting longer because there are more steps. Is that-
It could be that.
Or the test
For
taking
us, it
longer.
actually doesn't really get much longer, right?
Okay.
The time to test. You mean like literally the test duration?
The thing is maybe the number of steps in the test. You gave an example.
It could.
The test used to be just send a mail, now the test is
Send it
send,
in.
add an
With-
attachment
with
and send a
attachment.
mail.
It
So
could
it's
take
a
longer, yeah. It
Not in
could.
terms of time, but steps in the test.
Oh, it could, yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
Or
Oh, yeah.
complexity of the test.
Complexity of the
Complexity.
test. Appropriate to the quality that you're approaching, right, the quality gates or whatever you call them. Yeah.
Without omitting checking for the basics, right? I mean, you.
Yeah, you don't want to have a smoke test that misses something just so simple, right?
Well,
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
the power switch word.
Okay, so I think the distinction that I heard, I would skip the simple basics if they're also covered by the complicated test
Absolutely.
already.
Right, exactly,
Okay.
which typically they are. I mean.
And sometimes
if you
yes,
send
and
a
sometimes no.
complex email and it arrives, you know your basic transport is working.
But the point is, you need to think about it, right? And I think that's really the thing here, is you can't just say, we started on day one with these tests that are good all the way throughout. We have to really think about it. And one thing that's interesting on this, passing, and, or failing, is look at information theory. Does anybody actually study information theory of testing? It's super cool. There's not very many good papers on it, but there's some. But it's the idea that you are trying to gain information. If you know what the result is going to be, you've learned nothing, right? If you absolutely know what the result is. So if you know it's going to pass, because it's passed 10 times, you have to change a single line of code in that area, super high probability it will pass. When you run it, you haven't really learned anything. So change your tests so you can actually learn something. A little bit out of scope, maybe out of topic for smoke testing, but it does apply, but more gradually, I think, with smoke testing. Certification testing. If you want to sell in most countries, you have to pass certification tests. You want to put a USB sticker on. If you want to have the Windows logo, if you want to do a lot of things for certification tests. The purpose of these tests is to pass the tests. The purpose of these tests is not to make your product better. They might do that, but the purpose is to pass the test. Does anyone disagree with me on that? I hope somebody does. It sounds like a lot of you have done this. If you've ever done EMC type testing, and your goal is to pass a test and never touch it again. And so how do we use this? Because this is fundamentally not the kind of testing I'm talking about, right? This is something completely different. This is not intended to make your product better. This is intended to make you so you can sell your product or market it differently or do something, right?
Almost a minimum bar.
It can be a minimum bar. It can be, sometimes I don't even know what it is, but we got the sticker, right? But they're not falsifying tests. They're not intended to falsify. They're intended to pass, so it's completely outside what I'm talking about. But these are still important for your product, but not necessarily meeting our objective of shipping a high-quality product. They will do that if you're really bad, but there's something you can get from that, right? So if you're doing a certification test, you're there in the lab and you're watching the certified guy do a certified test, and you see, well, something weird just happened. If you're experienced, you won't say, whoa, that was weird, let's check that again. And if he thought it was okay, you let him finish and make a note of it. You go back into your lab and you check it and find if there is a problem with your product that you can fix, right? So you can still use these to help improve your product, but I highly encourage you not to sabotage passing the certification.
So I'm confused. So I agree the purpose is not to make the product better. But certification is definitely falsification, which is my tests are designed to show that you do not meet my certification.
But it's a low bar. I mean, I think that's.
Okay, maybe that's right. Maybe that's right. And
That's exactly what the certification bodies write their tests for, is to show that you're not passing their certification.
And maybe the idea then is they're static, and once you pass them, you're done.
That's
And
true.
the
That's all
difference.
true.
And maybe that's the difference. there.
Right, but they are falsifying.
They can be.
They're definitely falsifying.
Where do you align that with a user acceptance test? I mean, sometimes that's kind of the same kind of a bar as a certification test.
I don't think I have that in this anymore, but the user acceptance test is a lot like a certification test. As you got to go through those and pass them, and there's different types. One, you're the receiver. Some contractor's done for you, and they have to pass certain tests before you pay them. Right? There's those kinds of tests. And so your intent as the guy who created that code and is shipping that is to pass those tests.
Right.
Yeah.
I would
So
actually
it's
even
very
say,
similar.
say even the original smoke tests aren't to make the product better. They're just to show if the product works. They don't make it better.
Their intent is to, well, it can actually make the product significantly better. In fact, Amazon, this is a good example. At Amazon, we use them for that because, as maybe both, as you guys agree with this, smoke tests and those fundamental, we call them BAT,
Yeah.
tests, right? The pass rate of those is an indication of the quality of the product, right? If those are constantly failing, just randomly, you get a different failure every day, right? It's never in the same area. You know that your product quality is actually pretty low. It's like in manufacturing, when you have a lot of defects, even though you test all those out, you're shipping a poorer quality product. It is lower quality. And what my experience has been in those simple tests, if those are failing, even though there's always somebody different, it does give you an indication that your product quality is low. Do these make your product quality better? Only that they push the quality back to the people who keep failing it, because you go after them and say, what the heck are you doing? And then it does actually cause processes to improve.
And I guess you don't consider
upstream.
certification part of the quality of your product.
Well, you have to pass them.
Well, like I said, you don't consider the quality of your product.
It depends on the market.
I like the idea of it's a lower bar, right? I think
It is a lower bar, because it's not
oftentimes-
covering all of your product.
Yeah.
It's only covering that small portion that the certification cares about.
Yeah, I like the idea of the lower bar, because there are static tests that you just need to pass, you're not stepping it up and actually making the product better.
Okay.
But they do get you to a certain level, up for very specific things, right?
Right, very specific, it's not the whole product.
Yeah. Yep.
There you
Regression
go.
test. Who was it? Were you talking about regression testing? It's exactly the same. In fact, I even use the same little table. I get these every day also. We have 15,000 regression tests that we run on our tablets every day. Not every day, sorry. That we on a certain cadence. We have some that we run every day. And we did an analysis of the tests that we had, and 95% of the tests had never failed. Never failed in 6 months. We did a 6-month time period. Had never failed. On average, 95%. We had some that were failing. 70% of the tests had failed at least once during that time. So that's really a high percentage of regression tests that are failing. I think we only had 3 areas of, 50 or 60 different functional areas of the test that failed less than in the 90 percentages, a high 90 percentages, 95, 98, really high. So,
Wait, Scott, so I got kind of confusing. I heard you say 95% of the tests had never failed during that period.
yeah,
Is that true?
yes.
Then you said 70% had failed at least once during that
We
period.
had some functional areas that test suite. So we break these 15,000 tests into different functional areas. So one functional area might have 1,000 tests.
So you're basically saying there's bug density.
And that one, had a lot higher number of failures during that 6-month period.
Right.
And some of them had almost 100%.
Okay.
During
But there were 95% of the tests that never failed.
But only of the 50 or so areas, my numbers, I should probably just put the numbers in here. But of the 50 or so areas that we have, functional areas, I think only 2 or 3 areas had ever, in that 6-month period, were less than 90% of the tests had, I'm saying this all backwards.
Less than 90% of the tests had experienced any failure.
Yeah, three areas had
Most of the failures.
had a lot of failures in the regression tests. Right, these are tests that we run before. These are tests that supposedly had passed at least at some time. Right, this is we're just trying to show that we haven't regressed. Right, in fact, the hypothesis here we've not gotten worse than before. Right, than yesterday, the day before, than all of our history.
So presumably some of those tests, or many of those tests, were gating criteria to merge that code in, and so that's why they failed at some point, hopefully, in their lifespan, and then they passed from that point forward.
Most had never failed.
Which could indicate that you have a weaker party architecture there or something.
They could be very.
The area that was the worst absolutely is a weak part of architecture. It's actually a block of code we get from a vendor. If we don't control, it's easy to blame on someone else, but it turned out it was. And
Was it Microsoft?
they would make they made huge changes without telling us. That come in and we run these tests and just
Be Adobe.
So, that was some of it, but actually some of the code was our code. It was just an area that, for different reasons, I guess I'll say, we just had a team. It wasn't very good, right? The design was actually very poor. They didn't look at their interfaces, and it was just, it worked great when they tested in isolation. They tested in the system, it was a dismal failure. And so they needed to make some fundamental design changes. But so for me, I'm talking to the guys who run these regression tests. Actually, the regression tests I've just been talking about were all manual. 15,000 manual regression tests. It's like it's incredible. We have a great team in India that runs these manual tests. They actually are fantastic and they're very reliable. But wow, what an enormous effort. And so I'm talking to the manager, he did this analysis for me, and I said, okay, what should we do? If this is our testing approach, what should we do? And his thing was, well, let's not run the tests that have passed every day or every week or whatever the cadence is for each of these tests. Let's not run those quite as often.
Right.
And instead, let's do something that will find bugs.
Right.
Yes, that's really smart, right? And that's the whole idea here, right?
Are these all manual tests?
These were, what I'm talking about is manual tests.
Manual, okay, yeah.
Now we had,
Right.
I'm maybe telling too much of dirty laundry, but we're much better now.
If you're
We had,
I don't know what company you're talking about.
we had no automated regression suite at all. And so now we have quite an extensive one, but the same principles apply. In fact, we won't talk about automation here, but it is something that's really fun to talk about with this testing approach. So again, regression tests I believe also should be dynamic, and we just talked about one example, but again, that your test suite should be added to it, and I think most people do that, right? They add to their tests, and the tests actually become more difficult as you get farther along, and these are expected to pass. You can probably deprecate some of those really simple ones, especially if they're covered by the more complex ones, but sometimes you can only run so many tests, and you cut some of those, even though if they fail, it would be sad, you run them on much less cadence, and you balance that risk, right?
Is this slide all about manual testing?
No.
All about any kind of testing.
Any regression test.
It doesn't matter.
Why would you not run it, I mean, you're Amazon, AWS, and all that. Right, so why would you not run an automated test?
Because automated tests aren't free, right? And I don't mean computing time.
The analysis of failure.
Yep, analysis of failure and analysis of passes is the big cost, right?
Not
You
too
have to
much
analyze every test that passes also. So you want to run the test
Every
that
time
you
it
care to analyze. And maybe don't do it every time, but you know what I mean? If you have, this is actually an example that somebody gave me, they had roughly 1,000 tests in their automated test suite, and they've been running them for 9 months. So if you analyzed all the passes, no. I promise there's some false passes in there, or there's some things that say pass that aren't doing what you think they're doing, right? There's some tests in there that aren't valid. And so, to me, automation is really expensive. Sorry, I'm always talking to you guys because you're asking all the questions. So the smart people on this side.
I believe it.
So that I don't even know what I'm talking about. For regression, so whether it's manual test or automated test, it's expensive, right? You have to analyze the results. You have to really look at the results, and so you want to be smart in what you run, and you have a limited amount of time to do this, right? And so if you can run every test that you would ever want to run in the amount of time you have allotted, you're in a luxury position that I've never seen before. But I think it's maybe not possible, but if you can do that, then do it. But I would maybe propose that there's some tests that you probably can run that you aren't running. So the whole idea of regression tests, same thing. It should move as the product progresses, right? You don't want to run those exact same tests all the time that aren't giving you any new information. Risk. I'm not going to talk a lot about risk. I've mentioned risk a lot. You guys haven't said anything about it. How you assess risk really depends on your product. If it's a consumer electronics, or us and our customers accept actually some things that are pretty low quality, and some things they demand the highest quality. It depends on what it is, right? If it's a medical device that can kill somebody, the quality bar is super high, right? And you have to know what your quality bar is to assess your risk.
Well, and whether you're in a regulatory environment or not.
Yep.
If you're in a consumer environment, that's one thing, but if you're in a someone may get a $50 million fine because you screwed it up.
You might want to be a little more careful. Yep. Yeah, and
Or how competitive the market is.
yeah, and what quality risk you can accept.
Yeah, if you kill somebody, you're not gonna have to deal with that customer again.
Yeah, so that's a real advantage. You work for a medical device company?
Give you a better review.
Yeah. So the whole idea here at the bottom is I say do fewer full regression test cycles. This is like a hot button for me. I hear a lot about we got to run a full regression or we got to run a full test pass. To me, the full test pass is the tests that need to be run now, right? And the only person who can know that is the guy who's been touching that product throughout the cycle, understands where the risks are, and knows how to apply the limited number of people he has for this limited amount of time. Right? It's a really hard decision to make. Saying full test pass is the simple thing to say, and I think it's probably almost always wrong. I'll say it's always wrong, but that's really easy to refute, right? Feature system testing, this is going to sound a lot like everything I've ever said today. Again, this is just mainly what we do, right? This is the other things were like special purposes of that. A lot of the feature system testing go into regression tests, might go into smoke tests, might go into some of those others. But this is like, as the feature's being developed, as it is developed, it's like, this is what most of us do every day. So this is determine if feature system is working correctly for the stage of the product that you're in. Again, we're trying to disprove that hypothesis. So this is almost a summary of everything. Detailed test plan is your guide, tells you where you've been, tells you where you want to go, and the other things you see in there. Think before testing. I can't stress that enough to my teams. Don't do the thing because it's easy. Don't run the tests because you have them written down. There's an infinite number of tests that you could run. Every test you choose to run, you're saying it's more important than the infinite number that you could run, right? And so you're choosing in your limited resources to run that test. If it's the right test, fantastic, but don't do it just because you can. Do it because it's the right thing to do. And exploratory testing, I just put it on there because I think it's with great test people, whether you call it, people have very strict definitions on what exploratory means and ad hoc and bug bashes and all those things. All I'm talking about is smart test people who understand the product, who've been using the product, and they're finding the bugs. They're finding the problems with the product that the customers would have found if they didn't do it. That's what I mean. Really important. I was supposed to take that slide out, but it's been a fancy slide. And so this is the kind of reports that I often get, where this is the number of test cases. This is, in fact, what the VP of my group loves to see. You have a fixed number of tests at the beginning of the project. You run them until they're all passing. Right? We talked about this. This is something that's still not quite a good chart, but it's the idea is you're never going to run all your tests. There's always tests that you've figured out that you could run that you're not going to have time to run because maybe lower risk or you ran out of time and you decided those were less important. I show that there's none failing at the end, which is really unrealistic, but that's the part I don't like about the chart. Some passing, some failing. It's more dynamic, it grows, sometimes shrinks.
It's more dynamic even than that. What you aren't telling is which tests have not been run for the longest period of time.
That's right.
Is each day a different set of tests, even in that chart?
That's right. Yeah, and they are, right? And so it really is dynamic. And in the real world and good testing, you every day you have to make those decisions, right?
One thing for your chart that you might change is you're showing actually the number of tests going down halfway through. Is that intended or?
Yeah, I put that in there just to show that you could have a block of tests. I have blocks of tests, and I just think that I put in the beginning, and after I get into the product, I think these are just bogus.
Okay,
They're just dumb.
Design changes.
Or it could be a design change, or it could just be my misunderstanding of the product at the beginning, and I just like, those are dumb tests, and I pull them out. Right? That was the idea, is that things really can change for a lot of different reasons.
So distinguishing between not run, which is gray, and pulled out, which is gone.
Say that again? Oh yeah, right, that's right.
Yeah, that's why the whole magnitude of them summed together went down there.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, I think this is the last slide. Oh no, I don't want to go backwards. So, pretty obvious stuff. But this is something I asked myself, and this might have been in the Kaner book, I'm not sure. If I was paid $1 million for every bug that I find today, what would I test? And you're not going to run those tests that have passed every day for the last month. Unless you know something that will tell you those will pass or will fail.
It should be 1 million for every bug found, minus 1 million for every test run, and that doesn't find a bug.
I know that's
Then you got it.
a lot of people have said that. Nobody wants that one. Just the bugs found. But even I mean, I'm preaching this approach all the time, and for me to think that way, it always brings me back. Okay, wait, we really want to find the problems in this product. If our customers do, we want to make this product better, and that helps me keep my focus.
Yeah,
So it's a simple little question.
You have to have the second half of the question. You're paid $1 million for every bug that you found, and you're losing $1 million for every bug that you missed.
That's
So the customer finds.
yeah.
No, that you missed that full set of tests would have found.
Or that you missed and the customer found is the most important, right? That was actually what somebody said. You pay $1 million for every bug a customer finds, which all of that is true, right?
Right.
What we're talking about is this is the point of this. It makes me think that way, right? And to me that helps me bring it all back. I can forget about trying to figure out why I test the way I do. I test because I want to make the product better.
So we've already argued that. No, I disagree with the whole idea that if you are, okay, we can start with the test, the idea that the test will improve the quality of the product. But really what you're doing is just measuring the quality. And if you found a bug, it's a good bug, they fix it, that's good, that does improve the quality of the product. That's important. So you have to measure the quality of the whole product.
Absolutely.
And you will ship with bugs that you know about and bugs you don't know
Absolutely.
about. You just hope that the customers don't find a bug you don't know about. That is, well, that's a showstopper, really bad news. You want to prevent that, minimize the chance of that.
Yep.
But you will find lots of bugs that don't get fixed. And so the testing is about measuring quality, and then improving the product is another step. And
See, I say that improving the product is our first thing, and the measurement is how we make the business decision.
Well, they go together.
They do, absolutely go together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I want my testing to be thinking, first and foremost, improve the quality of the product.
Well, then you're telling them to find bugs.
Yes.
But not only that, but to find the bugs that are most likely to get fixed because they have the most impact.
But you have to do more than just look for bugs, because you have to measure the quality, and that's where I disagree with the idea that you would stop running some automated regression test, because it's been passing for a long time now. It's probably going to pass tomorrow.
Limited resources is the reason we would do that. Right?
Well, but for an automated test, if your resources are limited, or if you think it's the resources are expensive in evaluating the test results, and I suspect your automated tests are not written very well, if you have to do analysis.
Yeah, Matt.
So Matt, you're arguing you can't test quality to the product, and then your conclusion is that we should run more tests.
What I'm saying is that you have to measure the quality of the product.
That's fine.
All right.
But I do want to talk to you about this, because I think there's a subtle distinction that I'm not picking up.
Okay.
Maybe it's not so subtle.
Yeah, I think something that's missing in the equation there is that even if you have automated tests, they're a liability because you need to make sure that you're always maintaining them, you're always making sure that they stay up to date with your product. And you might have great people on your team, but that is an opportunity cost that you could be doing something else.
Art, I'm not missing that point. I'm saying that if he has to do maintenance on existing automated tests that are passing, I suspect that the automated tests are not written very well. Because if you have to go back and see, is this really doing it, then there's something wrong with your testing technique, or the way you write your tests. If they're not
Actually, no, the product changes over time, and the test becomes irrelevant.
Absolutely.
In other
but
words,
you still know what the test is doing.
no, you don't.
But it should be, if it's not self-documenting, then, well, maybe it's a poorly written test.
It could be, that could be one of the reasons,
Yeah.
but it could be other reasons too.
Right.
Let's get back to your slide.
Yeah.
Last slide, we're done. This implications to automation is actually really interesting when we're talking about some of that. It's not that easy. Some people think I'm against automation. Actually, I'm not. I invest in it almost more than anything I do, because I think it's actually required to do good testing. But I like the quote. That's a Karl Popper quote. So no more questions. I
I was just waiting for Matt.
think we're out of time. What time is it? We're way out of time? Okay, I'm getting nods, we're way out of time. So we can be done. I'll stay for a while. I'd love to talk about this more. This is the most animated group I've ever given this presentation. I'd hire all but like 2 or 3 of you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you.
You know, we've done 84 of these things now.
Well, he said India.